Welcome. Tonight's story isn't just about a blank white sheet, but about a city that shrinks and breathes between the sounds of sails and moorings, the iron pan on the kitchen stove, the fading chirp of a whistle on the sidewalk, and the snowflakes settling on the edges of rooftops like pale pearls. Against that backdrop stands the gas lamp, tall and stretched along the sidewalks like a thread of light leading you to other pages of the story. Before we dive into this quiet night, I'd love to know where you're joining us from. What city? What window? What cozy corner of the world? Let me know. And if you like this video, don't hesitate to hit the like button. If this kind of story speaks to you, subscribe for more. Now, after a night where sounds slowly faded into silence, you're waking up, opening your eyes to a room bathed in soft light flowing through a window dusted with delicate frost. The chill touches the glass, reminding you of the gentle cold brushing your cheek. Outside, snow blankets the street, like the city is wrapped between crystal pages, slowly unfolding like a book gently opening before you. The reader quietly reads to themselves. The first thing you notice is the silence. Not just any silence, but a soft wall that wraps around everything, dulling sharp sounds and bringing back their simple melody. Small whispers feel stronger when surrounded by calm. You slowly sit down to make yourself a pot of tea, and the warm, gentle scent rises to your nose, mixing with the faint smoke drifting from the nearby chimney. Those smells remind you of homes where days were spent together and little names passed through your memory without being spoken aloud. You touch the window with a cold hand and feel the icy texture that's settled on it. It draws delicate patterns on the glass, like tiny stories, and that feeling makes you sense that everything has paused for a moment to rearrange itself. As you get closer to the door, you hear the first crunch of snow under your shoe, clear, shaking sound. Your footsteps guide the city into a new reading. Each step alerts the shadows. Every mark you leave feels like a sentence in a long text written by winter alone. The nearby windows are dark, curtains tightly drawn, and a few street lamps cast a softened, sharp light. The quiet passing of a light carriage here, or the distant ring of a horse's bell there, feels far away from noisy clamor, more like a gentle hum in the city's chest. This is quiet that it doesn't drain you with events but gives you space to notice the little details. A handprint on the door handle, a book left on the table inside, a withered cheek behind a sheer curtain. Those details light up small memories inside you that no longer need noise to remind you of them. Quietness gives them enough clarity to stand before you without holding back. And with every step that leads you out of the house, silence stays as a gentle companion, preparing you for deeper details waiting to be told. Not with loud sounds, but with a steady, calm tone. As the white silence flows around you, you slip your hands into your gloves and feel their coldness, as if your memory itself is wrapped in a thin cloth. The cold there isn't just the absence of warmth. It's a tangible feeling pressing between your fingers, rearranging the small details on your face. You breathe slowly, your heartbeat matching each step, realizing the crunch of snow under your boots isn't noise but a soothing rhythm that calms your breath and gives each moment its rightful presence. Every foot that touches the ground leaves a temporary mark on the white, like the city writing its diary with fleeting strokes and hidden waiting. Every crack of the frost brings you closer to shop windows covered in frosted glass, with a heavy, cold texture on the surface made of delicate patterns. Someone had left a short poem on the window, like dew passing your fingers over the glass, sending the same chill back to your skin, light as a whisper from the past. Behind this glass, there's the scent of warm tea mixed with a faint smoke, coming from small lamps or stoves still patiently working in the houses. You feel like the whole city is sharing a cup of patience. The shouting almost fades away, and the only sounds now are your footsteps, the distant whistle of the wind, and wisps of smoke slowly drifting up to the sky. On every street, you come across little details that spark memories. Half-buried milk cans on the sidewalk, a door someone left ajar to let the warmth in, a strip of paper clinging to a leafless tree, and old, worn-out headphones hanging there, telling you what happened before the silence. You stop for a moment and listen to the sound of your shoes, realizing all those small moments passed unnoticed. But the quiet has given them a light that doesn't bother anyone. The rhythm of your steps hints at little stories waiting to be told, short characters crossing this blank page and then disappearing. You keep walking and notice people moving slowly as usual, but here the slowness carries a kind of wisdom. Someone reaches out their right hand. A woman holds a basket of bread, and a boy writes tiny numbers on the snow before her foot gently covers them. Quiet doesn't erase joy or pain. It lights them up like a candle, revealing the details of faces you might miss in the noise of everyday life. With every step, the story gets closer. The rhythm connects you to them and promises there are more moments ahead that will reveal the traces those steps left behind. The snow beneath your feet still plays its simple music. You lean against the window like someone asking permission from something asleep and wipe the glass with a glove-covered hand, cold from the chill. Your fingers draw a thin line, revealing a pale face of the city, as if an old memory has just pulled back its curtain for a moment. The icy touch on the glass sparkles under your palm, cold like a metal sheet but not biting. It gives back a soft bounce from a small inner warmth. The smell of tea drifts from a nearby cabin's kettle, and light steam curls like a delicate scarf over the morning's chest. The crunch of snow under your boots still rings in your ears, giving you a sense of moving forward. The city hums quietly between moments. You read a tiny map in the crystals, branching lines like hidden veins of light, and with eyes that love to ponder, you search for a building. A familiar iron minaret or the burnt-out facade of an old shop hides behind a curtain of frozen minutes. The glass invites a closer look, and the features gradually come into focus, not by rushing, but by fading away and reforming. You realize its presence isn't just a physical shape, but a space where little stories have paused. A child left a toy under the stairs. A woman placed a basket on a bench. A man came home tired, searching for warm bread. The calm here isn't emptiness, but a force that shrinks noise and magnifies memory. Under a curved light, shiny details stand out like jagged edges on the building's roof, and the windows look like half-closed eyes telling a tangled story of names and places. You catch every tiny tap on the glass as if it's a heartbeat of memory, bringing a line from the past back to life. One glimpse is enough. These crystals are like old pages, each holding a small sentence about the people who walked this path before the snow fell silent. Closed sounds, whispered conversations, the murmur of tea, a sip, smoke blending with silence, turning calm into a power that lights up small memories, one after another. You're not waiting for clarity as a punishment for the unknown, but as a gentle invitation to slow down. You let your hand tremble, rise, and in a second you catch another spot on the glass. You know there are other shapes that start to form if you get closer, and your gaze lingers on the delicate crystal threads gently guiding you forward. Your steps keep turning the silence into a soft rhythm. You pause for a moment, breathing in the cold, clear air that bites your lungs, letting the world slow down its heartbeat around you, as if the city itself has entered a state of caution and awareness. The few sounds left are the crunch of snow beneath your shoes and your breath, a soft sigh. A scarf clings to your face, and together they create a simple melody that sways between your hands, reminding you that every movement here leaves a tiny mark on a bigger surface. You look at your hands. The gloves that kept you warm all night now feel lighter from the cold. You touch the kitchen window, covered in a layer of frost, feeling its icy smoothness like a glassy touch. Your fingers brush over it, sparking an old memory of a hand warmed by a cup of tea. You walk slowly, effortlessly, rearranging your breath, feeling each step give the city a chance to reset itself and reveal its hidden parts. The wooden door still holding the weight of long nights, the stairs storing whispers and footsteps, the heater leaking the scent of tea and smoke through its cracks. It's light, like a message coming from inside the houses, saying that routine still holds strong despite the chaos outside. An old voice spins in your head, steps, knocks, whispers, like delicate threads slowly telling a story to an abandoned musical instrument. This slow pace lets you bring back faces, names, little things lined up on the shelves of memory. You pause for a moment at a window of a small cafe, looking inside at a table with a teapot steaming pale-colored vapor. The smell of tea mixed with wood smoke fills the space in front of you and makes its way into your lungs, making you feel connected to everything happening inside every room. People move slowly too. A woman sewing with tears, a man silently wiping his wife, a child rubbing his glasses against the edge of frozen frost. The slowness here isn't a setback but a deliberate pause, giving everything a chance to be seen, fixed, and told. You feel like everyone on the street carries a piece of their own story and needs to meet this kind of quiet attention. You realize this slowing down isn't detachment from the world, but a way to meet it more clearly. And your hand wiping the ice off the glass, revealing the window, opens little moments of remembering. Names of neighbors, questions about bread you forgot, signs hanging still, no movement. The sound of a bell, hymns trying to break through the snow in the alleys. You take another breath and see how slow becomes strength, lighting up these little memories like a lamp that doesn't blaze a bright path, but gently makes things feel alive. This pace stays a calm entrance where other people's stories meet yours, giving you a reason to pause again, then move forward with careful steps toward a different day taking shape. The quiet wiped away by a hand became a faint glow. Edward Harris stepped out before dawn, his coat wrapped tight around his neck, his diary closed tight under his arm. The weight of the city pressed on his lips, asking quietly for permission. The street in front of him was like a page stitched with a soft layer of snow, the path he was used to reading in motion now stripped of its usual life. The only tram cars stood still, like frozen lines in an old story. His footsteps hurried silently on purpose, the snow crunching under his shoes, filling the moments with a repetitive tapping that didn't disturb the quiet but confirmed it, like a small heartbeat reminding the city it was there. He wasn't after big stories. He was looking for small details to brighten the pale face of the day. He came upon a half-open door, and through it rose, thin smoke mixed with the scent of tea colors the moment with an old memory. A child sitting at a small table, watching a candy seller slowly cover his cart, a man coming back from the storage carrying a warm loaf wrapped in cloth, and a girl staring out the window, her hands wrapped around a hot cup, steam rising like a short arc connecting the inside of the house to the snowy street outside. Their voices were soft, words without exaggerated emotion, and smiles that spoke more through shrugged shoulders than through their mouths. Every question was noted in his notebook. Each line he wrote added a layer of warmth to the frozen city page. The power lines, once the city's beating network, were now coated in ice, their poles like crystal, their ends resembling tiny shells along the roads. No messages today, no telegraph signals, just echoes of the past. But people, despite their differences, found their own ways. Some walked with empty hands, some carried groceries, some licked their fingers to warm their throats. Their steps showed a quiet strength, as if calm itself was a small lamp glowing behind memory's door. Edward wrote quietly, memorizing names and signing them with graceful handwriting, his pen weaving a network opposite the silence. The city's like a network telling those who aren't here what's left behind. I passed by an abandoned station, snow piled up against its glass front. Ice on the glass drew thin lines that memory borrows from, like scattered stories. They looked like tiny pictures hanging on the city's face. In every corner, you could spot someone who doesn't talk much, but their quiet strength reads out loud. Edward's steady steps and soft breath made it seem like the city was quietly confessing itself. His footsteps took him to scenes that showed how people held on, just as memories do, day after day. At the edge of his path, an even quieter, more painful scene appeared. Edward stood still, breathing freezing on his lips, like the air itself was holding back words. On the icy street, eaten away by frost until it looked like a thick white rope, the tram cars sat abandoned like forgotten bodies on the roadside. Their doors shut, lights off, and windows darkened with thick layers of ice stretched tight like delicate fabric. The men gathered around her looked like missing letters in the broken sentence of the city. Some of them unbuttoned their coats and loosened their collars until their chests were bare against a ruthless storm. They pushed through mechanical life with battered but steady muscles, as if performing some ancient ritual to rebuild the world with firm will and no noise. The sound of snow crunching under his boots became a small marker of existence. Every step made a thin tap, like signing today's page. The swirling snow wrapped the scene like a thin veil slowly hanging down, catching the edges of things and feeding them halos of white, making objects lose their sharp outlines and look more like cartoons in an old book. Some passers-by cracked open their doors a bit, letting the smell of tea and light smoke slip out, a mix that reminded him of hidden faces unseen since morning. It felt like their unspoken words were whispers about postponed errands and cautious kids near the heaters, rising as thin steam into the morning air and blending with the cold. The scene wasn't just about failed communication or connection. It was a record of small victories. The motion's tragedy spoke in quiet silence. A shoe caught on a rope, a hand pulled back, clenched tight, with a muffled laugh as two people held onto each other, pushing forward together. A kid jumped over an icy puddle, the sound breaking the silence. The laugh itself was an attempt to melt that stillness. Even the breaths rushing out with each tram push felt like primitive rhythms gently holding the city's heart. Without shaking its calm point, one man pressed his palm against the cold tram window, feeling the ice beneath it like skin etched with fine frost. As he touched it, it was like reading a map to a place he couldn't reach anymore, except by turning his body into a tiny engine. Edward realized this moment would stick in his memory as a single detail. How silence can be a force that quiets the noise, how calm can light up small memories like faint lanterns along a long street. He left his side at the broken doorstep and started eavesdropping on the slow-moving city, knowing there would be stories about these men and the open doors. Closer details would tell him how life would go on no matter what. With the weight of snow on his steps, the mailman moved forward in almost steady strides. A young guy with a brow furrowed from the cold, wrapping his hand in a guard that barely kept out the chill. The air itself tapped a little drum. The package he carried in his arms wasn't bigger than a box lined with old cloth, but that morning it felt like a promise resting on the city's shoulder. There was one thing that had to be put back in its place for everything to make sense again. The snow muffled each slow step, as if the sky was keeping the noise of the world away. The sound of the snow crunching under his boots was soft, reminding him of his mother's footsteps coming home from the market on clearer days. He passed through piles of debris from corners life had forgotten. A half-submerged tram cart, a wall with a streetlight pole sticking out, doors sealed shut under layers of ice. A strong wind blew and swept away half the snow, catching him by surprise, but he didn't let go of the package. It felt like the package was the heart of an appointment others hadn't kept yet. After a while, he twisted his ankle, stopped, shook the snow off his shoulder quickly, then placed his hand gently on the ground, remembering a brief moment when an old woman handed him a cup of fragrant tea with a light wisp of smoke. The smell of the tea and the faint smoke brought back a quiet warmth to his chest. Quiet moments like that could spark small memories in the shadows. He reached a house with a facade almost covered in snow. It wasn't just the doors that blocked messages. The glass was too. There might have been a thin layer of frost on it, so he touched it with the back of his hand and felt the glass like ice, as if he were touching a delicate winter page. The woman opened the door after hearing his knock, a sound choked with both joy and worry. Her face was lit by a small lamp that flickered, revealing lines of waiting and hope. Her eyes asked him about the sender and the source of the package before he even spoke. He quietly handed her the box, as if passing on something bigger than a simple item, something like a piece of time, suspended and hanging on a fragile thread of hope. Inside the house, the atmosphere was different, broken only by the sound of tea on the stove, the drip of water from a kettle into a cup, no music, and a child in the corner who clung to his blanket like it was a small refuge. The woman slowly, very slowly, unwrapped the tape and opened the box to find a folded paper inside, along with a stamp and a pen, reminders of a weight filled with both hope and disappointment. The contents weren't just personal news. They were news about someone far away, maybe about work or a promise. A face faded slightly then returned. There was no crying or shouting, just a calmness settling in, and silence grew strong, digging into a long memory of patience. The city valued every letter or package as a small spark of resilience. When they said their goodbyes, the young man stepped out with a chest full of a heavy kind of lightness. They saw the news like someone reading a map of a faraway place, and with the soft crunch of a shoe on snow, a bigger picture formed in his mind. A single letter carrier's bag could become a teenager waiting for the whole city, a small sign reminding everyone that the news never stops just because the streets have. He walked away across the street toward where the remains of the tram and other sounds waited, carrying a quiet energy of patience. He left behind the warmth of home to return to a cold that calmly rearranged names and events. As the man pushed the tram through the heavy snow, a small crowd gathered on the sidewalk. It was as if the city itself covered its mouth. The sound of snow crunching underfoot, a shared breath tying the people together. They carried a narrow coffin or a wrapped bundle, like poor folks doing when they say goodbye to a little angel. The steps were slow and deliberate, no rush needed. The crowd wanted to give time more space to fill with honesty. There was no music, just whispers calling out familiar names. Hands reached out only for a light touch on a shoulder or a gentle press into the unforgiving snow. Then, respect bowed down before silence, held captive by familiar souls that didn't want to be forgotten. They hurried past him without a glance, moving too fast to notice. The young messenger stepped out from the group, holding his small package like it was wings carrying it over his heart. He found the coffin in his hands, a silent answer that needed no words, just a long quiet. Then, in the middle of the street, where the building fronts looked like old, faded houses from some distant memory, a few of them turned toward a single window lit by a lone candle. The other houses stayed closed up like chests, their windows shutting their secrets out from the cold. But that candle was like a second window, a sign of human presence still watching the world through the curtain. Halfway down the street, they saw a soft light glowing, and a shadow that seemed to be listening to some old memory. The candle flickered, moving the shadows on the wall like the way longing stirs in the hearts of passers-by. The smell of tea and light smoke was like a gentle intelligence weaving through the air, slipping slowly through the cracks in the door. Someone inside was sending a greeting out, a quiet message that here, calmness guards the memories. The young messenger paused for a moment. The package weighed heavy in his hand, but he didn't set it down. It was as if he believed there was one last message inside that shouldn't be left alone on this evening. He remembered his mother's face, or maybe the neighbor lady who always put the kettle on for anyone knocking at her door. He remembered the warmth of bare hands that once pulled back the curtain to catch a glimpse of a lost moment, and the candle was like a spark of that warmth, sending out a gentle pulse in a night that had grown harsher than it should be. In that simple exchange between shadow, scent, and light, the sadness seemed less lonely than you'd expect. Even the quiet felt like a strength, lighting up the edges of the story and gently guiding it to safety. The crowd slowly broke up after drawing a small circle around the bundle, and the sound faded away, like the wind after a long whisper. The light stayed at the window, telling its own story softly, patiently, ready to spill out later into the city's corners. Then you found yourself at the station, where silence wrapped around the electric lamps that had dimmed, as if the city had rejected its fake perfumes. Only the train lamps hung there like tender eyes, seeing nothing but a thick white barrier. The smell of tea and faint smoke rose from a small teapot on a nearby table, carried by a man named Imran, who was handing out cup after cup to those around him, as if offering little tickets to a temporary warmth. Outside on the platform, you hear the crunch of snow underfoot, a sharp sound and cold breath, but it's coming from somewhere beyond this place. Here, the sound of quiet conversations and occasional laughter filled the air, as if the city itself was trying to whisper without causing any disturbance. The station benches were crowded with people who didn't know each other, yet their eyes all held a spark, a glow from a candle in a distant window, the same light mentioned earlier. The boy who delivered the mail, now a symbol in town, rested his small package on his knee while talking about unfinished journeys. An old woman shared pieces of bread among neighbors who had considered themselves strangers just an hour ago. A man in a heavy coat tapped lightly, then bit into the apple he was given, smiling as if the cold had opened a door to warmth. Here, short stories came to life. A neighbor preparing for his son, a worker who missed his appointment, a student who failed an exam. Each tale added another layer of meaning to the grasp of darkness around. The exchange took on a ritual form. The bread was sliced, stories unfolded, faces lit up with gratitude. Everyone spoke calmly, with neither fear nor suspicious quiet, but with a build-up of stories told to ease the weight of silence. Someone pulled a small candle from their cloak, its light nearly touching the icy surface of the window across. The glow reflected on the snowflakes, as if tiny notes were being struck between the gaps. creating a faint, delicate melody you could almost hear. Shoe steps on a frozen sidewalk, and you realize the crunch of snow underfoot sets a rhythm. That's the signal that rearranges the sounds of people around you. Conversation doesn't thrive on big news, but on small acts of sharing. Someone cutting a piece of cheese, sharing a slice of bread, telling a story about a sleeping child. Here, kindness isn't some rare act, but a simple pattern spreading like steam from hot tea in cold air. I sat there, and faces started to recognize me without names. You hear the memory of a small eviction becoming a sign of shared patience, and you catch sight of a candle in a far window, spreading warmth through the howling wind. In this still place, calm feels like a force. Not just silence, but a light that illuminates little memories and lets stories flow quietly. I realized that stepping away from daily routines gave a moment of closeness I never imagined. A cold bench and a small piece of bread could turn into a feast of kindness. And so, the station tried to become a temporary family, slowly turning toward another day. The candle still quietly hides its shadow. This isn't just a story about ice, but about the things that keep a city human. Keys, doors, sounds hiding in the background. The chest isn't just a number in a weather log. It's an old hand touching cold metal, bringing back a place full of meaning. The man stood at the edge of the sidewalk, leaning lightly on a wooden cane, the key gleaming in his palm like it was telling its own story. His eyes weren't fooled by the storm that had turned the streets into blank pages. Instead, he was looking for a crack that used to open a gate long shut, like a forgotten box. The wind barely made a sound, but their silence was even louder. In that quiet, the city seemed to lose some of its memory. The soft crunch of snow under his shoe was a gentle rhythm marking his steps, just like the passing nights of his life. The moonlight wasn't much help. It only showed icy patches, not the door's chest, and the neighborhood doors answered only with thick silence. He remembered the smell of tea and light smoke from a small cafe he used to visit, a scent that came back like a soft memory, warming the hand before the fever. Carefully, he ran the key between his fingers. Its weight told a story. The edges were worn down from too much use, and the corners almost seemed to whisper the names of those who had been there long ago. He held the key up to his face, as if reading the scratches in its metal, and it brought back a house with a low doorstep and a child playing nearby. From the oven's heat or the cold easing off, the winter chill wasn't harsh. The scenes from the past weren't glaringly bright but gentle, like a naive tap on the shoulder of someone coming home from work. He didn't find the gate, but he found that the search itself mattered, like rummaging through old pockets for a faded piece of paper with a name barely legible from afar. Walking down a street dusted with ice, other doors looked closed too. Every key might belong to a different secret in the city. The key in his hand turned the cold into something else, a promise that some trace hadn't vanished yet, a trace that would come back and open some old windows in the city. He stopped outside, held a hot cup of tea given by a neighbor, and the smell of tea mixed with light smoke and the icy touch on the glass stirred memories, softening the moment. He gripped the key like someone holding on to a memory they don't want to lose and kept following a trail with no clear end, almost whispering to the other keys that the city hadn't forgotten any of its streets. The faint light in a distant window answered back with a calm chill, opening a small door to a dream leading to another trace. After a long quiet in the dark, the old man asked his younger neighbor about that gate, and words flowed from his lips like drops slowly melting the frost. Just a little, but he had a memory sharp as the tips of his fingers. He started listing names that seemed to him like an old painting hanging on a wall in a snowy Broadway alley. A narrow lane climbing up to Madison Square, buildings with small windows reflecting the streetlights as if they were catching their breath. Every name his neighbor said felt like touching the key of a cold man. The key in his pocket moved as if the city inside him was responding. Memories appeared like thin sheets of paper, some warped by snow, others neatly folded. The conversation took a turn into details. A wood shop, the scent of dark tea, a faint wisp of smoke drifting from an old heater. At a moment by the shop window, where the ice on the glass traced lines like the edges of distant leaves, when the name of a street was mentioned, the sound was like footsteps on a snowy sidewalk. The crunch of snow underfoot repeated between words, bringing them closer to a scene they once knew with hope before the night erased it. The neighbor wasn't just recounting dates. He was reshaping a feeling of place, turning it into a fabric of sounds, smells, and textures. With every name he uttered, their memories blended with images of small gates. Some open, some closed gates that had once embraced them. Simple certainties. Neighbors taking turns, morning bread charity, a vendor shouting at a shop door, children's toys left on a doorstep to come back full of laughter instead of every door holding a small history. A whisper that doesn't ask for proof but just wants to be heard. And with that whisper, the man regained the key's calm. It was no longer just cold metal, but a promise to reach a story still alive on people's lips. Then the conversation shifted to names no longer on the city map, buildings hidden beneath a white crust, and stations whose lights had gone out. When the neighbor ended a part of the story, the taste of tea, the smell of light smoke, and memory lingered in the air like a little candle flickering on details before the frost gently blew it out. The words faded, giving way to silence that prepared them for the rest of the doors yet to be told. The key was still cold in his hand, like in his memory, frost tracing time's lines on his face. He met the nurse at the corner of a half-closed building. She looked tired, as if guarding the night's secrets in her eyes that only calculated. She spoke slowly about the hospital that had stopped working. Not cursing but just listing facts, the ones who stayed and the movements that didn't finish. She told him how she got close to his family without the noise breaking them apart. How the quiet there became a slow power, lighting up small memories. A family photo on the table, a worn ring under the pillow, a name carved on the edge of the bed. With every memory she recalled, it brought back a street or a corner of the city, names that had seemed like symbols of its lost gates to him. Then she told him about moments of urgency in a voice that handed them out like medicine. A quick decision about moving a patient or leaving them where they were. Needles stuck into skin without feeling because the syringes ran out or because the ambulance no longer delivered neighbors' requests for a blanket or a small stove. Simple acts turned into pressing duties. But she didn't mention storms or screams. Instead, she spoke of a quiet universe overflowing with human gestures that repeated silently, like footsteps on a snow-covered sidewalk. The calm there wasn't just the absence of pain. It was a small lamp that let her read patients' names on damp notebooks and remember their silent stories, which tired lips would reveal when the noise faded between her words. A scent of tea and real warmth mixed with faint smoke from the neighbor's stove drifted out. A smell that brought her a brief rest between a rustle and a cough. She turned the ICU room into a temporary lounge for memories. She said they gathered patients who talked about alleys, building fronts, doors, and some who mentioned names like they were actual keys. Some held her hand for a moment, like they were pointing to something deeper than the cold. The key in his pocket rang in his mind every time a street name was mentioned, and the city quietly echoed back the promises her hands had made. The two walked together for a bit, exchanging names and memories as if they were sharing a blanket. It seemed like even the calm was guiding them, a soft light on a frozen path toward moments that would later tell stories of bliss and duty. The street names kept spinning in his mind. He stopped by the curb, watching a circle of people around a small fire in a snow-covered alley. The whole city had paused to listen to that low sound. The crunch of snow underfoot matched the short breaths. The fire wasn't big, just an old metal bucket leaning against some stones, with a teapot blackened to the color of night. Thin steam rose gently like the breath of rainy places before they disappear. The smell of tea and light smoke carried a kind of comfort that stirred tired hearts. It wasn't just a warming ritual, but something more, a sign of a small life still trying to go on. They gathered row after row, holding out their hands with small copper cups or paper ones, borrowed and returned. The details of their hands said what words couldn't. A pale man's eyes were fixed on the frosted window, and next to him stood a woman with the name of an old street on her lips. She repeated it like an old prayer. A street called that. Then, slowly, she added comforting words, as if drawing a fine line of light in the air. The gentle words summed up mirrors of memories, bringing back little images to people. A shop door, an iron staircase, a shoemaker's window, marks engraved on hearts and lit up again by a flash of steam. There was no need for fancy speech. The quiet sound of footsteps on snow, a distant whistle from a parked cart, whispers exchanged over warming cups. All of this created an alternate rhythm for a city momentarily silenced from its noise. Here, calm was strength, not emptiness. A field where memories could grow. They shared small news about neighbors who'd gone, someone who helped quietly, a cat returning home after the words ended, not with triumph or sobs, but lingering like hidden rays of light on the frozen names. And that was all he noticed. How did the exchanging of cups become such a brotherly bond? Every cup passed from hand to hand was like a promise that the city was still searching for its warmth. Even the quiet pauses between words soaked up the heat from the tea, rearranging memories. Their voices blended with distant knocks on windows covered in ice. The touch of frost on the glass looked like a transparent mask surrounding the city, making the inside clearer than the outside. They weren't trying to solve the storm with their words. Instead, each one was gaining inner strength enough to stand tall. Between passing cups and whispering names, the city settled into a calm night, like a blank page ready for the next lines. The whispers by the fire and the teacups continued. The storyteller noted down names, one after another, like little maps of longing. Each name was like a piece of bread thrown onto a long table. Marikili pressed a napkin around a bundle of bread, cutting it in two, speaking only with a faint smile, like candlelight hiding behind ice-covered glass. The smell of tea and light smoke clung to her coat like memories cling to an old voice. Domenico Rossi, the owner of the small restaurant in the alley, arrived carrying a heavy bag and a smile. Bread by the fingers, kneaded out of habit, unleashed its spirit. It was nothing but a deep melody, like a fine line on damp paper. Ishak Goldstein placed his piece on the hand of a trembling child and silently brushed it off. Came like a breeze gently caressing his cheek. Anna Faze didn't speak, but she looked at the nurse's face and passed a small piece of bread, as if whispering a memory of a mother far from home. The narrator noted down other names, each one leaving its mark on a humble scene. Will Brown, who made his way through the snow. The sound of his footsteps crunching under his shoes stayed in his memory like a steady rhythm. He handed out bread to passers-by like time measured on an old clock. Never late. Margaret O'Connor came with a small cloth covering the bread, like a mother shielding her stories, her smile unshaken by the cold's harshness. Yahya bin Yusuf, the noble carpenter, carved pieces of bread with his pen to fit little mouths. The icy touch on the glass drew fine lines on his face, like a city map he hadn't read yet. Susan Lee, who barely spoke, carefully took out a baked piece from her worn pocket, a remnant from a previous morning. Names from different neighborhoods were recorded, their stories woven together like threads in one fabric. Boutros Nader, who came from the port, he carried the bread like it was a greeting from the sea, and joy sparked in his fingers as he wrapped the loaf around his hand. Naeem Hassan shared his bread with an old neighbor, saying no more than to hold his hand for a moment, while the smell of tea and light smoke filled the hallway. These weren't just names on a paper. They were treasures of a gentle morning, messages that kept their calm alive until late at night. That calm was a strength that lit up their small memories like lanterns, casting light on forgotten scenes. And that's how the network was built. Names linked to simple movements. A finger cutting bread, eyes smiling under a damp hat, the sound of snow crunching under a shoe. Each name became a link in a chain that stretched and swayed, counting stories that would grow from the mouth of time without any noise. The tea kettle's glow stayed bright in the alley's memory. The wind didn't just rustle the trees. The city's faces revealed themselves to it, with kindness and coldness mixed together. These weren't just images softened by snow. They unfolded like old pages under the dim light of a lamp. Some of them reached out their hands in the way they had inherited from days without addresses. A hunched man carrying a basket of leftover bread was handing it out to those who had stumbled. Nearby, a small shop owner opened her cupboard and laid out a row of coats on the doorstep. Barefoot kids made snow benches for passers-by to lean on. Drivers pulled their carts by hand when the horses broke down, and every gentle touch brought a calm feeling, like the scent of tea and faint smoke lingering in people's noses as a shared memory. There were relationships caught in the storm like old mirrors, where every face appeared clear and unfiltered. The usual city mother, cradling her baby to her chest, slipped into a merchant's house whose name she barely knew and gave half her warmth away. Another man stayed in a corner guarding his tools as if protecting a memory, never leaving his doorstep except to shut it tight against a sound that unsettled him. At the bus station where the buses had stopped, a simple system formed. Some folks cleared a path for passers-by, others chopped firewood into small, carryable pieces, and a woman with a gentle grip lined up rows of wet shoes to dry. Acts like these turned quiet into strength, a light from an indoor lamp warming small memories untouched by the storm's harshness. One borrowed moment was enough to capture it all. How did silence become a job no less important than tires or the doorbell? But not every face showed relief. Some just stood there with their hands tied, not out of bitterness or obligation, but from a habit rooted deep in the mirrors of their upper-floor homes, where the city is seen like a scene passing behind untouchable glass. Meanwhile, the faces lined up on the sidewalks were echoes of an old tune, knowing that a hug doesn't take much and that tea served on simple, undecorated saucers can be as vital as a decision. Beneath the surface, a page remained, its words scattered long ago by names written lightly in the margins of a notebook, now more like fingerprints, leaving faint marks in the cold street. Those names and that pain won't disappear from the city's view, and soon it'll be clear where the eyes of the upper rooms stand when comparing faces. The city began to hear itself in a quieter voice, writing from behind a window frosted with snow and ink, slowly fading. The streets fell silent, medical carts and shops all stood still like chess pieces on a white board untouched since morning. The sounds of the old station still lingered in his memory. The smokers sipping tea by the heater, the older workers pressing buttons then staring off. The wires stretched out like weak bodies, unable to bear the storm's weight. In the newspaper office, the silent machines lay still like broken birds, while the men read the remaining letters by flashlight. Here, reading was a gentle act of managing nature's obstacles, separating names of those who shared a piece of bread, writing them slowly as if to prove their existence. The smell of tea and faint smoke drifted up the building stairs into the workspace. This scent was a bridge between heads that hadn't escaped the cold. In the alleys, short conversations were woven around small stoves, where they'd put a bowl of bread in front of strangers, smiling softly with knowing eyes. Then the voices faded beneath the cold rhythm of falling snow. The least silence does is strip sounds of their extras, leaving only their true essentials, like scraping paint off an old board to find a delicate carving. In the telegraph rooms, pens stayed where they were on the table, and the signal's disturbance left nothing but empty spaces on crumpled paper. People felt their own threads. The woman who marked the neighbor's door with her elbow to let them know she'd sent food. The boy who left a shoe on the stairs. No, someone slipped. Then there was a small stain on the edge of his column. A tiny dried tea ring that became a more honest signature than any headline. This little mark, like a name, would tell the upcoming stories. Just like a single touch can suggest a long life, when he gathered his words in that small column, he wrote a sentence that didn't just describe. It captured a feeling. 3 days of silence that could make a city listen to itself. What he meant was that silence isn't a weakness, but a strength that sharpens memory and lights up faces, like a faint candle. That sentence revealed tiny circles of memories, lighting up one by one, leaving a thin thread stretching toward what would be discovered later. That small mark on the edge of the page stayed there, waiting for a reader to notice it later. And amid the city's silence, a faint sparkle appeared. Not about how harsh the cold was or the snowplows blocking the streets, but about the little things that keep memory alive inside stone and steel. It's not the crumpled newspaper pages or the shouts of passers-by that last, but a tiny drop of hidden light, small as a grain of rice, enough to open a window onto the everyday things the city was hiding. That sparkle caught the eye of everyone passing by, all without any plan. It cut through people's gazes and gave them a moment, just one heartbeat long, outside of time. It wasn't a loud light, just a tiny glimmer reflected off the stuff beneath the snow layer. A small smile on the pale face of the sidewalk. Some people moved closer, others reached out their hands without thinking, while a few stepped back, leaving space for a sudden curiosity. At that crossroads, the sound of snow crunching underfoot set a slow, steady rhythm, like the city was whispering its familiar names. The smell of tea rising from kitchen windows, with light smoke curling at the edges, added a cozy warmth to the scene. Through frost-covered windows, everything looked like a delicate painting where the sparkle stayed like a little story still waiting for someone to hear it. The absent one they were all looking at from afar wasn't just one person but a tangled web of memories. Folded pictures inside old button cases, medicine bottles with vintage labels, maybe a small photo of kids on a yellowed piece of paper. That sparkle that broke the daily dullness was a promise that what seemed trivial might actually carry names, places, and faces. One passerby, taking a long look, thought to himself that this light, the cold, didn't just come to decorate the frost, but to remind of thousands of stories hidden beneath a thin layer of forgetfulness. An old man, his fingers stiff from the cold, bent down to gently scoop up the sparkle like someone picking up their pillow. A small treasure revealed itself, a little piece made of copper or hammered metal, something between a miniature farming tool and a necklace. What mattered wasn't the market value, but how this piece rearranged memory. The passing names, voices, touches of quiet. Here, silence wasn't empty or meaningless. It was a force that lit up those tiny memories, forcing the city to see itself in a cold silver mirror. And within this quiet lay a small power to turn a tiny spark of light into a long story, slowly told in front of windows covered with ice. Hands would soon reach out to catch what remained, and the tale would quietly take shape, slowly leading beyond this moment of grasping. Within the folds of silence, the little sparkle reappeared. The city tried to ignore it, like ignoring any stray light on a long night. Wooden benches in front of shops were draped in layers of snow. Doors were shut and windows looked like closed eyes, listening to the unspoken. Walking through the streets felt like crossing through. The old page flipped gently, no loud noise, no rush. Still, that sparkle didn't escape the eyes that never ignored the little things. That tiny sparkle looked like a frozen time capsule waiting for someone to wake it up. The kid stepped carefully, snow crunching softly under his shoes, making a steady, gentle rhythm like a flutter. His small hand trembled more than it should, not just from the cold, but from a pure curiosity that created its own warmth. Fingers slipped into thin gloves, then slowly opened to touch that sparkle. When his hand met the surface, the flash wasn't just light, it felt like a solid thing. He sensed coldness, transparency reflecting winter-covered faces, and a metallic shine trapped inside a skin of clear ice. Other eyes drew closer, noticing the movement. The city wasn't just dead silent. It felt like a library of broken memories. The doctor dragging himself back from his shop, the lady running the bakery, the mailman still puffing on his cigar from the corner of his mouth. Each one caught in that tiny space between the hand and the frozen piece, while the kid lifted the ice like a thin shell from another world, clear as glass. The metal looked like it was waiting to be read, like an ancient manuscript. The shape of the piece caught the eye strongly, but not surprisingly. It was a small copper disc, its surface engraved with fine details. Half the symbol clear, the other half faded, as if part of a map or an old society's emblem had been stamped on it. Around the edge was a thin rim, like a ship's rib, and in the center a small hole, maybe once a fastening point. It spoke silently, reminding you of old visitor badges with their rounded edges, or coat buttons that carried family stories, or folded photographs tucked in coat pockets. It wasn't just metal. It was a small gem of memory slowly hardening on the city's streets. The piece didn't worry about itself, but its silence grew brighter with every breath around it. People came closer, not to compete over discovering it, but to share a vision that time hadn't yet erased. A child's hand pointed to a shape that told stories. Stories of something maybe dropped from someone's pocket in a hurry long ago, or a link between two distant photos in the same album. The cold of the ice didn't dim the warmth of history the metal held. In fact, the calm in its steady presence made space for those memories to come alive. The little sparkle appeared, then vanished into the palm of his hand, but it stayed in his mind. Eyes kept following it while his fingers traced a pattern that looked like a tiny, fossilized map, inviting him to open an album or tell an old story that could reshape the city in an instant. Silence gently left the place as if it had given the right to speak to just one memory. leaving room for breaths to rebuild the image. Still, the sparkle stayed small in his hand. The boy looked at it like someone who found something the wind had dropped on the edge of an old road, keeping it more carefully than most people keep precious things. The snow covering the metal piece didn't seem broken. It was more like a thin shield guarding a secret. Every time he tried to brush off the snowflakes, they bounced back like they were retreating out of respect, then stuck again to a layer of transparent white crystals shining with the innocence of gloved fingers. The gloves felt cold, but it didn't bother him much because the cold wasn't just a property of the metal. It was delicate, like a little story told in breaths. The air smelled faintly of brewed tea from nearby windows, with a light hint of smoke as a quiet sign of something else. Stoves still burning under the white bed of the storm. That smell tied the boy to a place he couldn't see, with people he didn't know, and from which little faces of steam would come out, making the city's memory feel a bit deeper beneath its weather. Shifting the layers off the piece was a slow process, worked on by the snow itself, as if it didn't want to give up its reassurance. Thin peeling here, a thread of frozen debris there, and when the first edge of a thin hook appeared, something throbbed in the girl's chest. Not fear or joy, but a feeling of connection. The key showed itself shyly, not fully the first time, like an old piece of wood being brought back after long scratching with nails. The features gradually appeared. A round head and a small carved spiral that didn't press hard into the palm, and a thin leg ending in frost, like an old lamp licking forgotten shine. When she grasped it by the rusty handle, it didn't feel dangerous, but like holding a piece of an old house's memory, with hesitant footsteps echoing beyond walls no longer visible, and doors closed by people who left for different reasons, or when the days themselves left them. The key wasn't just metal. It was a small translation of the idea of locked doors for those doors. The doors weren't just closed because they'd never open again. They were closed to freeze a moment in time. The way he pictured the doors wasn't grand or dramatic. They were quiet, like calm itself was a kind of power lighting up small memories. Doors leading to a kitchen warm with the smell of tea, to a room with velvet glass touched by frost, to silent shops. Alleyways hung faded pictures on their windows. The key opened an album of undefined faces in old frames and simple trinkets, including other keys tossed under the snow or taken by accident. The memory of hating the city got tangled up in tiny details. Still, the snow clung to the edges like a half-closed door whispering that there's more hidden beneath, and that this small piece still has more than just a simple function for the keys. In the child's hand, the key trembled under the pale light. To the observer, it looked like a small relic from another time, its metal surface cracked with delicate engravings too intricate to decipher under the ice's shell. One letter tried to peek through while the rest slept. The letters weren't just letters. They were carefully carved lines recalling old shop signs with wide flourishes like the kind letters had back when every letter was a work of art. Letters, and around those letters, tiny faces made of plant leaves and delicate circles. Maybe a maker's mark or the name of an abandoned house. Layers of snow slowly cut across the print, changing the patterns, parts fading away while others come forward. The carvings look like a diary that gently closes and opens its doors, leaving its mark on the surface, like how stone shows the wear of time on an old doorway. The observer could see in those details a mix of eras, an artificial eye from a relatively modern age, and a line that goes back to a workshop or heirs from a century earlier. The way it was cut carries the marks of tools whose names have since changed. With this, Zeej rebuilt the key, creating a faint thread between the recent past of the neighborhood, before the storm when doors were painted and sealed, and a more distant past when keys were treated as sacred objects given to those who opened the doors. Early American houses held no secrets, layers piled up from use and ownership, each leaving on the metal a difference only visible to someone who stops to listen. While some lines disappear under frozen glass, the observer recalls the icy touch on the nearby window, a cold, smooth surface like forgotten skin, softly tapping fingers as they pass over it. Someone gives the impression that the city itself preserves its memory with calmness, not denial, and the quiet here isn't emptiness but an act that keeps the small things safe. It controls the breath of memories so they don't slip away and gives the key from its life enough patience to slowly reveal what hasn't been uncovered yet. The observer lingers on these small details, feeling that the unread inscription is a gateway to names and images yet untold. Reading what the ice hides takes time, but its stillness isn't feared. The mind moves to another page where images pile up and gently rearrange the old faces of the neighborhood. Meanwhile, as the key freezes that small silence, the craftsman works slowly, not disturbing the place. He brushes his fingers, wiped with a soft cloth, over cold metal, like tracing the tiniest drawings on an old page. He dims his lamp a little, not to light up the whole world but to give the object the shadow it needs to return to itself. He doesn't rush to force memory onto the key but takes his time with every move, like reading a forgotten line in the margin of a long book. He senses vaguely that the past isn't recovered by force but called forth gently, like the feel of ice on glass, that clear gel clinging to shapes. On the surface of the key, there were cold edges and tiny cracks like threads of gathered light, frozen in time. You could read them like tree bark, where small frost patches had been gently brushed away with a soft-haired brush. Each gentle swipe revealed something previously hidden. Tiny letters oddly large against the sharp metal, as if someone had quickly scratched them in. Then days passed and forgetfulness took over. The letters were an abbreviation of an old street name. Just a few letters now only lingering as a shadow on curved maps inside rare books at small libraries. The craftsman never spoke the name, but he remembered a map displayed in an old smithy shop, where street names were once written in elegant script, only to be replaced by numbers or slowly erased as the city grew. The abbreviation didn't just reveal a name. It pointed to a neighborhood that once held people's stories in a quiet corner of the city. Its streets were buried beneath layers of development, renamed and forgotten over time. In his hand, the key felt like a small relic, something that didn't hold wisdom but preserved the power of its traces. A window, a wooden frame, a narrow staircase, the smell of bread from a bakery that no longer existed. Those letters, in their humility, acted like a gateway, not forcing themselves but quietly reminding him that names don't just disappear. They tuck themselves away in the memory pockets of those who still care about something small. Then the craftsman set the piece of cloth aside, ran his finger over the frozen engraving one last time, like wrapping up a chapter in a calm voice. Soon, the key settled back into its quiet state, full of potential, a handful of images waiting to be recalled. The stillness that came with the discovery was like a bridge to an old map in the next room. The whisper now invited a new step toward pages handwritten and perched on the edge of memories. The key stayed a silent companion, not flashy or big enough to catch the eye among treasures, but holding layers that couldn't be measured in gold. Layers of tea scent and faint smoke that seeped through the lower floor's eaves, and fingerprints still trapped in the metal's edges, as if time itself had etched the names of a simple past. People passed by it without a second thought. Some touched it casually, others brushed it as a greeting through the hands of those who knew its name, connected by shared history and stories. Those who carried it weren't owners, just witnesses. And when snow covered it, it turned into a symbol pulsing with the memory of the place. Like a small compass rearranging their inner maps, the calm was a kind of strength. No one shouted orders or gave commands. Instead, they organized the descriptions of things, and the images began to come alive in those early mornings after the storm. They could hear the soft crunch of snow underfoot, a gentle sound that convinced the ears the city was carrying on with its day. That same sound brought back memories of those who took care of the floors, who left the teapot on the heater to cool down, letting its scent linger and leave a trace on the curtains. Every photo taken of the building had a foggy quality through frost-covered glass, carrying conflicting signs in its lines. A worn stair edge, an old billboard, a street name carved on a key. And so the key became the link connecting those images, not as a final seal but as a delicate thread tying together scattered memories. Over time, the key became a keeper of small, intertwined stories. Today you might find it in a worn pocket, tomorrow on a local museum shelf, and later maybe in a story a neighbor tells his son about a woman who used to call out to her companion from the window every evening. Whenever someone studies the feel of ice on glass, they remember how people loved to leave a little piece of themselves outside their homes. A tiny metal token. She managed to gather the scattered pieces of memory and put them back in order, like a neglected mirror reflecting unlit faces. The quiet here revealed a trace that doesn't vanish just by closing a door. It waits to be opened again by those who still remember the names of the staircases and the sounds of the neighbors. Then a new image starts creeping into the building's memory. A brief summary. The small key didn't have monetary value, but it held value through its faint connection between people and the building's memory. While the key lay frozen on the wooden table, according to the slow-talking residents' legends, it had a practical use before becoming a symbol. A servant used it for a family living in the nearby monument, a man whose story came before the tales shaped it. He'd come early in the morning to brush snow off the doorstep, put the teapot on the small fire, and arrange the blankets in a room that only grew bigger when filled with quiet people. His key wasn't decorated with fancy engravings, just a simple marking pointing to a street long forgotten by name. When you touch it, you feel its old chill, as if it holds intertwined layers of time. On stormy nights, the quiet memory says so. He used to stop by the glass of the monument, staring at the frozen feather. The icy touch on the glass drew a thin line between inside and outside. That line alone was enough to tell him where memories crossed. His disappearance wasn't clear. The servant vanished one night when the wind suddenly went silent, and the snow covered his footprints like a carefully closed page. There was no obvious clue except a shield made of ice, broken on a back door, and an engraved key they later found at the base of an iron staircase. The family didn't announce his name much. Instead, they focused on small things. A hat left on a chair that rocked as if someone's memory of sitting was still there. The key became a symbol of absence. When they took it out, the light in the room shifted, outside sounds grew faint, and the carved faces on the monument seemed to quietly relive the moment of meeting. People who knew the servant saw his disappearance as the end of a way of service that no longer fit a time that had become faster than before. Even though the monument still demanded silence and care through generations, memory quietly rebelled against forgetting, skillfully placing framed pictures behind glass that had faded a little, with frosted edges like whispers preserving details too small to be told. With a clatter, the key itself passed from hand to hand. The kids touched it carefully, like they were handling an old coin, listening to a silence that seemed to say something unsaid. And so, the key stayed as a silent symbol. Remember, sometimes quiet can be a kind of strength. It lights up little memories and brings them back to life with a cool, glassy touch. A short story. The key that the monument's caretaker used stayed as a sign of absence, stirring a calm memory. The thread dangled from the coat pocket. They moved slowly, as if walking over old pages, and the snow under their shoes muffled their steps like tiny mirrors whispering about a past gone by. The alley was narrow, walls close together, with snow piled up reminding them of forgotten parts of the city. Beneath that cold white, brick lines and faded marks showed through. Marks familiar to passing eyes, but now they strained to catch every detail. The air smelled of warm tea mixed with faint smoke slipping through cracks in nearby doors. The building's residents sent small signals to those passing by, letting them know the house still had life, and that the cold carried sounds that made temporary families on the streets. That scene led them to a place that seemed forgotten by time, where they saw small metal edges peeked out from beneath the snow. A window knee-height, sealed with a cold iron mesh. The distance from the big keys to this tiny one wasn't far in memory. The mark engraved on the key now whispered to a barely visible edge, only seen by a careful eye. Volunteers cleared the snow with their dry hands, and the sound, a soft creak, felt like slowly turning pages of a paper book, gently, lovingly. When the opening was revealed, behind it was thin glass, covered with a fine layer of frost. Its texture under the touch was like old glass, holding a breath of cold air. Someone reached out, brushed the frost lightly with their fingertips, then blew softly. The frost vanished in tiny crystals, like eyes blinking open and closed. They placed the key next to the mesh and stared closely at its groove and engravings. No longer just letters but a memory bottle linking this window to an old street. People used to pass by silently almost every day, exchanging greetings in a time that no longer counts. The faint crunch of snow underfoot continued like a background rhythm, and the scent of tea and smoke grew closer, hinting at a nearby neighbor or a kitchen that never puts out its fire as the key began to. For the small room, they felt that even quietness could be a kind of strength, gently knocking on memory's door. The window opened just a bit, not much, like someone reaching out to check an old photo without disturbing its words. What was inside was faint but enough to calm the tired story. The worn chair, leftover cup, maybe tea, and a wisp of smoke clinging to glass that hadn't been cleaned in a while not too long ago. The moment stayed tender. They held onto it without making a sound. Here, silence didn't mean absence but a presence that brought back little forgotten names. The next touch on the hinges was soft, promising things the gap hadn't revealed yet. The key barely touched the doorknob before the metal pin silently spun in his palm. Then the friction gave way to a long wooden groan. Nothing like the usual lock's creak. It was as if something dark was being born in the air. That sound was like a breath from the old house, a fragile thread of long-broken loyalty. It wasn't a sudden uproar, but a gentle release that fell like snow on the windowsill, shifting the weight of the moment without breaking its calm. When the door opened, nothing crashed down or rushed in. Instead, the creak lingered inside. The walls were used to silence, like they were calling out to memories stored on dark shelves. He never expected that the touch of wood would shout with such impact, yet slowly, the place started to feel different, as if the air had stretched out and his breath was now rearranging old photos on the table. Photos covered in dust like delayed letters. The smell of tea he always noticed at the house's entrance now seemed clearer, mixed with a faint smoke from a distant stove, forming a layer of pure memories. That scent pulled him toward a specific corner of the past, where time was measured in small warm cups. The icy glass outside sparkled under dim light, reminding him that the city lay beyond them, suspended in silence. The heavy crunch of snow under his shoes still softened with every step, but he didn't rush the moment. Instead, he wrote it down like a quiet line in the margin of memory. The furniture at the edge of the room hadn't moved, but the creaking brought with it a past presence. The tailor's chair, a half-open book, a strip of fabric with a tiny mark like someone's forgotten signature. At that moment, he realized the key didn't just unlock a door. It unlocked a knot inside the story itself. Every piece of wood stopped speaking, and every panel faced the light. To give a piece of herself, she placed her wrist on the table, feeling the texture of the wood. When her fingers curled back, she sensed a faint sound, like the bend of an old instrument. A simple metaphor for time passing, like a delicate bridge between today and memory. The wooden sound didn't vanish completely. It lingered like a thin thread connecting the discovered moment to the city waiting outside to be told its stories again. The faint creak confirmed the weight of memories behind that door, whose hinges seemed to hold the echo of footsteps. She found a small cabinet attached to the wall, like a keeper of time. The wood, carried by the night before them, bore the marks of old finger carvings and light coffee rings with every use. She opened the cabinet silently, fitting for things not yet meant to be seen. The scent of tea and faint smoke drifted from its folds, as if the room itself had dressed in its daily attire. Outside, soft footsteps crept in. The snow crunched underfoot, and silence grew deeper, sharpening the room's power to listen. Light bent through the frosted glass, sharpening the brightness of the papers and the icy texture on the glass, where faint fingerprints were left behind. Carefully stacked notebooks caught her attention with their pages. Some of the pages were torn along the edges, others ripped by the wind or by leaving. The writing, done with a ballpoint pen, wavered between neatness and messiness, listing everyday things. Laundry lists, work hours, firewood prices, simple recipes, and short notes about long nights or simple kids who loved a particular kind of bread. Each page looked like a piece of cloth just cleared of snow. Looking at them brought the fabric back to life. Under a pile of laundry descriptions, a small key appeared, tucked between two folds of paper. It wasn't just a piece of metal. It was proof from a hand that knew keys and their weights. Its surface was cold, but its edges had touched the warmth of the palm that held it many times. The tiny scratches told stories of countless encounters with locks. Nearby, the maid had written her daughter's name in the margin, as if giving the world a little piece of her presence when all she had was ink. Below that name was a single line mentioning the key, but in a poetic way. The key that never leaves. That phrase transformed it from a metal object into a link between people's hearts and a vault of days. Reading those notes was slow and deliberate, respecting every line. There was no rush to follow the names, no need for underlining. The neighborhood sounds recorded there came to us from another time. The sound of the oil tank in the morning, children's laughter behind the curtains, and the tone of the man who's never absent. Emotions weren't described as storms but as small touches, like a drop of tea on a napkin or the smell of smoke filling a room when the ovens opened. Every time a page was turned, the scent of tea quietly rose from the memory. The ink itself mixed with it, gaining a soul. The key became a witness, a way to communicate with memories. The hand that wrote those lines carried the world and gently placed it between the pages, like setting a ring of the past on the finger of the present. Through the little drawer, a meeting happened between cold things and the hidden warmth born from daily memories. The snow here didn't cover but preserved. The reading ended on a half-written page, with a note saying there are more letters yet to be sorted. So the narrator left the paper and left the door ajar, inviting more. Silence, it turns out, is fate. It lights up what some saw as a margin. The key was no longer ordinary. It became a mark that spoke in silence. The lamp's light dimmed as people got used to its touch, and memory kept it like an anchor holds its place in the sea. A key in color. The old building started presenting itself as a reference point for the family and their neighbors, like a chapter read aloud across time. Some began picking up pages from the diaries and reading them quietly, like someone reciting an old prescription they've memorized. In those lines, they found the rituals of the small town before it was swallowed by storms. Names that once seemed meaningless in the neighborhood's memory came back with new weight. The reading wasn't just a replay of events. It was a contemplative practice. One would read, and the others would settle down to listen to how the stories were told. Their rhythm, the smell of tea and light smoke drifting from the cups, as if reheating cold times. The pages passed from hand to hand like letters being returned to their sender. But now the sender was the past itself, asking to be understood. Someone scribbled a small note next to the lines about the maid, a reference to a day gone by, or a diary entry about a street name erased by new construction, or a faint sketch of a scene their neighbor once saw from the window. And so, a popular archive was formed, not written by historians, but made by hands still able to turn what seemed like a margin into a story with real meaning. In cafes and hallways, comments mixed with soft laughter, and the gathering turned into a device connected individual memory with the city's memory. The key wasn't just a symbol of nostalgia but a right to recall memories and share them among people. These readings weren't without attempts at interpretation. Some saw a simple phrase as an announcement of an old social withdrawal, while others saw it as a description of a ritual that now only exists in the limits of its letters. The contradictions didn't disturb the peace. In fact, the calm felt like a strength that reinforced the fragile threads of memory, making repeating street names and made stories something possible and meaningful. As evenings passed, the reading turned into a weekly ritual for those wanting to hold onto a cluster of the past that doesn't fade easily, like caring for a cup of tea before it cools. The key quietly kept talking. Not just a piece of metal or a tool to open doors anymore, but a word exchanged between mouths and pages, linking scattered times in the city. Near frosted windows where the touch of ice left marks on the glass, sounds gently knocked on the doors of memory, preparing for the next moment that would draw attention to a new trace the storm left on the urban scene. And amid the silence of the pages, the key kept watch. The story was placed under a warm glass in a small wooden box inside a temporary museum, where the lights were dim enough not to steal the coldness from outside. The glass was like a window and a dome at once. On one side, the metal gleamed quietly, and on the other, the world curled into silent sheets of ice. Eyes came to read the curves and engravings as if reading the signature of someone who was no longer there. Fingers returned to memories that hadn't touched the key, while the scent of tea mixed with a faint smoke from the stove nearby rose up, recording the story through many senses before it spoke words. Every morning, the guard would place a cup on a nearby table and open his notebook. With a fine pen, he'd draw short lines telling where the key came from. But the real story wasn't written all at once. It unfolded through small paintings, burnt-edged photos, letters patched with snow, and a small safe that revealed the maid's diary. Inside the space, the glass carried a double effect. Its cold surface was harsh like ice on the window of an abandoned house, while its warm, electric touch from the inside turned the metal into a light you could actually feel. One touch on the glass showed the temperature differences and brought the hearing back. You hear the crunch of snow underfoot as someone approaches the museum door, like the outside is telling a story alongside what's inside. The story gets retold in quick chats by the gate, in school lessons where kids stand silently staring, and in articles printed on folded yellow pages. The key became a symbol for a single purpose, a tool to unlock a frozen moment in time, a mirror reflecting a collective memory that's revisited all around the city. People would come by and leave their names in a visitor's book next to a box, writing a couple of lines about their grandfather or mother who talked about the storm like it was just another familiar chapter of family history. And with every retelling, the little spirit of the key would show up in a new tone, as if the city's memory warmed up and moved forward, like a cup of tea. This warmth doesn't erase the cold outside, but offers a different way to tell the same story. At night, when the streets narrow and the ice blankets the sidewalks, the box glows softly, and the glass outside feels the icy touch but stays warm inside. The light turns on it, keeping the key safe like a small story held in an old chest. And every time the storm is remembered, the key is mentioned again, and the fingerprints come back to life. Scents and whispers reshape the story, leaving the city to breathe quietly like a force that lights up small memories and keeps them alive between snow, glass, and the waiting light. In the end, the key stayed in a small, temporary museum, placed under warm glass, while its story replayed every time the storm was mentioned. A pale light slipped through the window, carving names onto the night's face. The key's shadow under the glass called up the city's memory without a sound. Inside the private club, warmth gently settled on their shoulders. They sat around a table bathed in soft light, reading the news from damp newspapers with shaky reporters' handwriting. The tea's steam gave off a warm scent mixed with faint smoke, and their glasses were slowly swirled by hands, as if feeling the pulse of a day interrupted by stillness. Outside, the windows were darkened by thin layers of ice, the icy texture on the glass reminding them of a transparent shell guarding the world inside. Nothing more, nothing less, like faint shadows holding the faces of things before revealing them. They didn't hear the snow tapping on their doors like the streets did. The noise outside the club's walls had faded away like an unopened message, and the news buzzed quietly through the room. The heater sounds like a distant piano, not interrupting their easy conversation or letting their feet rest. The heater's warmth moves like a storm, reading like a story from an old magazine, its details wrapped in light humor and a breath of fake sympathy. The frost eating away at the sidewalks had no name. Inside these walls, their borrowed warmth felt like a lifeline, but really, it was just a mirror showing faces of a city fading into the fog. Near the heater, someone was fiddling with a small metal key in their pocket, not out of carelessness, but like a memory they'd occasionally flash. The maid's key had become a symbol in their minds too, kept safe under warm glass in a makeshift museum. A tiny picture of a whole life, preserved like drops of wax from a lighthouse. They looked at it like someone reading ancient inscriptions. They noticed the snow crunch beneath the passers-by's shoes, not wanting to hear the story of someone with nowhere to go, curled up on a nearby street corner. The key sat quietly there, catching the lamp's light like it caught memories once. Back when the newsroom was run gently, newspapers were handed out with soft voices, and men and women exchanged words like they did handcuffs of thanks for keeping the monotony alive. Every outside disturbance became a passing piece of news, wrapped in a worried tone, carefully arranged but not touching the real pain of the streets. Outside the glass, you sometimes hear the crunch of snow underfoot, a distant, gentle fear quietly cloaking the city in slow silence. Inside, though, calm lives like a power that lights up small memories. A servant's name, the smell of tea left behind, the imprint of a message on wet paper. They hold conversations about supplies and letters, swapping political moves as if the city's just a small stage where roles quickly fade away. Meanwhile, outside their doors, life moves even slower, like stepping carefully on thin ice, sound stopping right there. Yet every corner inside the club still holds the trace of sunlight that once passed through the glass on another morning. These quiet remnants remind us the city is more than just a map of crystals. It's names that appear and vanish. As the talk goes on and the tea keeps giving off its scent, the key stays under the glass. A soft sound linking warmth and cold, reminding us that silence can be a strength that lights up small memories for those willing to listen. Slowly, the windows prepare to let in new light, and the city gets ready for something unspoken. As the ice gently touches the glass with a soft chill in the room, elevated above the street on a glass table lit by dim lamps, businessmen sat surrounded by papers and notebooks filled with zeros and complicated calculations. Their voices were steady, like deliberate ripples on a calm surface, while the scent of tea and light smoke curled around the cups like a shawl hiding their facial expressions. Frosted patterns covered the glass in front of them, reminding one of a museum's keepsake key. Words fell like snowflakes, appearing as logical lines, numbers slicing through minutes, rearranging losses and profits. Their figures were cold wires linking the pages, as if building bridges over an endless silence. Then, cautiously and professionally, the conversation continued in low tones, discussing possibilities. Halted shipping lines, goods lost in snowy streets, contracts that could be postponed or canceled, banks demanding harsher guarantees. The talk circled around losses, charts here, possible signatures there, redistributing liabilities, all within a warm space, far from the dampness that dulled the sidewalks. Meanwhile, the messenger's notes told stories of the messenger, the doctor, and the neighbor, sneaking into one man's mind like distant shadows. No, the page felt like their words were a mirror, but the street's footsteps didn't reflect in it. No one was talking about fingers stiffening or doors being knocked on in vain. Those things weren't meant to be captured in words carved on white paper. Then someone started drawing a vertical line on the blueprint, without a laugh or any sound, just the quiet calm in that room. It wasn't empty. It was a force digging into tiny details and lighting them up with a gentle mystery. Memories appeared like delicate objects on an inner shelf. While someone lightly traced a frost crease on the glass with their finger, a memory of a key under warm glass in a temporary exhibit came up. It hadn't helped in the math lecture but kept reflecting there like something untouched by zeros and words inside. The bitterness kept trying to sort out market losses like someone organizing their desk tools, while outside those windows the city whispered things that couldn't be measured by contracts or pens. Between that whisper and the pages, something else waited gently to be pointed out, more softly than the math. Meanwhile, inside the warm windows, laughter kept echoing lightly. They sat with him like old friends, swapping jokes about the power outage, treating it like a punchline that measured surprise more than anything else. Laughter measured the danger, tightening and stretching like strips of light reflecting on frosted glass. Their fingers, relaxed over glowing cups of tea, stirred memories of a small key stuck in someone's pocket, a symbol of warmth remembered more by the hand than the mind. Jokes were told quickly and gently, sparking smiles that faded like birds that never linger long. Each time, the silent whisper returned, a sound unheard, the pain on the sidewalk, inside homes with windows shut tight. Families quietly and deliberately fought the darkness. Kids gathered around a small pot of soup, their tongues memorizing the spoon's warmth as if it held a secret. The mother slowly kneaded bread like an old story, soothing anxious hearts. The hands holding the pot sometimes trembled, but the dominant sound inside the house was steady calm. A silent energy standing like a thin wall between the cold rush outside and faces craving warmth. The smell of tea and faint smoke slipped through window cracks, as if the city was offering itself, reminding everyone that warmth is sometimes shared quietly and without fanfare. Meanwhile, the jokes reflected a social fabric that healed pain more by connection than by words. She owned responses followed by rehearsed phrases. The laughter, there was nothing more than a thin shell hiding a mask. That danger is a system, and comfort is an issue. Meanwhile, under the dim lights, needs were measured by the stomach before the hall. The woman shaped by jokes recreated silence. Another silence that didn't let pain's voice out, but turned it into a small story told in a low voice by the fireplace. These simple stories strengthened the present more than anything else. Surrounded by candles and quiet, it worked like a force that dripped memories with gentle patience. In the corners, The shadow of a small key lingered, a mark that never left the mind. A metal piece bearing the weight of memory and rearranging warmth whenever the hand lifted it. Though the jokes never heard full size, the woman was silent to pulses that never got a voice. The ending was just a continuation into the night's embrace, where footsteps on snow scattered like steps leading to another presence, less flashy and more measured. With small houses still warm in their memory, the city administration sent veiled, official-looking letters to those used to their orders echoing in their chests. Guidance and direction letters tucked in white envelopes with ink marks on them, like gates. The paper was written in a neutral, precise language, filled with numbers, dates, and rulings, carrying an administrative coldness beneath which beat a sense of responsibility, trying not to disturb the logic of things. Across the street from the municipality building, snow quietly fell under the reporter's shoes. A short, steady sound accompanied the official patrol, as if the ground was quietly marking the presence of a system, setting its boundaries in a low whisper. The elite received messages behind locked doors in rooms where the light from lamps shifted through the winter hours. There were small cups of tea, the smell of tea and faint smoke, a scent that reminded one of homes warmed from within, flirting with the edges of memory. They sat hesitantly, caught between outward loyalty and private calculations. The instructions approved ways of cooperation but also drew lines of distinction: who was tasked with managing the work and who monitored its results. The administrative gate here didn't just close with solid steel. It set distances for access, judging who urgent needs called for and who had to wait on supply lists. Meetings ended in softly lit wings, where plans were carefully woven on dotted paper stamped in layers, and some people's small memories drifted off on old images of winter nights. When there were footsteps on the stairs, the whole house felt like it shared a story. In the lower neighborhoods, people who didn't easily get the city's messages at home would gather, sharing thin cups of tea and quiet wishes. Sometimes, the calm obedience crept in like a force that saved their small memories from fading away. Authority felt steady at times, like a distant light guiding ships, and other times like a tradition demanding accountability and coordination. This mixed feeling of responsibility and privilege formed a kind of dividing line in the city's table, a gate separating those who saved themselves through official means from others who simply survived thanks to neighborhood warmth and companionship. The calmness managed to keep lighting up small memories without noise, preparing the ground for the next quiet step. With the warmth of homes all around, the eyes of the elite stayed fixed above the city. They settled in high houses where heavy curtains muffled street noise, and a piece of cloth soaked in morning dew hung from a wide window overlooking the city, which looked small like an old map. Doors and gates appeared as neat black dots, and the cars parked under the snow were marks you could only hear when your fingers traced them on paper. The room smells like tea and light smoke mixing together, sending out a warm vibe that swirls around the edges of the cups. Quiet headphones carry clear, orderly commands like the rules of an old game. In a place where people reveal themselves slowly, silence becomes a pure kind of strength, lighting up little memories laid out on a wooden table, photos with broken edges, smiling at people whose voices haven't been heard in a while. They watch, like someone holding a map of the winds, measuring the distances between warm spots and making their judgments like a gardener trimming branches. They tell short stories about men who spent nights working, women who gathered teacups in the alley, strangers searching for immediate shelter. One tells these tales with a tone mixing surprise and calm, where sarcasm feels like comfort, not judgment. Still, the scene's details are harder to grasp. Then, a step in the snow breaks the quiet, dulling everyone's attention, reminding them that the places providing protection are just a temporary layer over the heart of a bustling city. The feel of ice on the glass sends a gentle chill whenever a child's fingertips brush it, as if memory is speaking through a soft touch, painting a picture of the street. In this new setting, the experience isn't just about material differences. It's about how the weather shapes the way existence is felt. They hear the crunch of snow under passers-by's shoes like distant music, while those below respond with sheets of paper, bundles of firewood, and communal cooking. But the quiet inside those high rooms doesn't erase their sense of responsibility. Instead, it transforms it from something obligatory into a memory etched deep in the names and faces on the walls. Some evenings, They sit silently by the windows, watching the dim light of lamps blending with the soft bubbling of tea in the pot. From that silence comes a kind of energy that strengthens their small memories and turns the present into a destiny that begins with wisdom, embodied in preserving the past. So, as they tasted the silence of snow from a temporary height, their gazes stayed fixed on both themselves and the city, balancing gentle compassion with a quiet reassurance that doesn't make a fuss, leaving a small window open in the fabric for visitors whom morning asks about life's details. A brief glimpse from above, the elite watched the city, caught the scent of tea and would smoke, felt the ice on the glass. And in that, the quiet became a force that lights up memories. Small and caught between the folds of frozen days, the city feels like a slow-hearted book. The aftermath of the great 1888 storm still lingers on the sidewalks. White pages holding lines of footsteps long gone, names fading along with the sound of carriages that stopped running. The lamps on the streams and alleys spill a soft light that flows over the hardened asphalt, while the wind whispers remnants of tales and gathers threads of silence in the corners of the streets. The trace of 3 days of stillness hangs on the doorsteps, in the faces now coming alive again, and in my names gently recalled. An old snow remains at the edge, giving tomorrow some room to breathe.